Are ya ready, kids?
Hello, it's Employee Emilian, and welcome back to SpongeComs. Today's episode is Season 2, Episode 15, or Episode 35 overall, The Secret Box, and the critically acclaimed Band Geeks, both of which originally aired on Nick on September 7th, 2001. And these were also the first episodes to air on Nickelodeon's Totally Twisted Telly block, if you're interested in old Nickelodeon schedules and archives and all that stuff. Basically, this is the start of SpongeBob's third broadcast season, but come on, we don't really use broadcast seasons because it's just so spread out, isn't it? Secret Box was written by Walt Dawn, Paul Tibbett, and Meriwether Williams. As I said, premiered on September 2001, so yeah. A bit early, I think. You might be wondering that. And that's because I want to get to these episodes at some level of between when they were finished and between that and when they aired, because we all know Nickelodeon likes holding them back, and they did that especially as the end of the pre-movie era happened, so that they could air more episodes in preparation of the movie. But yeah, sorry about airing this a bit early and not on the premiere date, or not close to when it would have been completed, but again, I want to hit a nice balance of that. This episode was actually inspired by something that happened in creative director Derek Dryman's childhood. He had a secret box, and Steven Hillenberg and the guys thought that was so funny that they made a whole episode out of that where he was Patrick. And that must have been the ultimate insult back in the day. Just, here's something from my childhood. Okay, you can be Patrick in this episode. But Dryman was the creative director for this episode and pretty much every episode in the first 3 seasons, so I'm sure it wasn't too insulting and he took it all in good jest and all that. And this episode has some pretty good wordplay for this period of the show. It's all about secrets, and because, like Opposite Day, that is a certain sector of our knowledge that we hide away or can flip around, SpongeBob thinks that he can do secret stuff secretly, and I think that's kind of a clever way to take it. Like in Opposite Day, he ran into paradoxes of that, and secrets are kind of the same thing. It's sort of like a sequel episode to Opposite Day in that regard, only much more focused on SpongeBob and Patrick. This is a prototype for a few Season 5 episodes where only they appear alongside Gary. I think that this is actually the first episode. No, actually there was Dumped, wasn't there? But that had some other voice actors in it, I think. But yeah, there were a lot of these SpongeBob and Patrick only episodes popping up, and thankfully this one's a lot funnier than Dumped. It's just got more meat on its bones, there's more character development. For the very first time, we actually get to see Patrick's rock as if it were a house, and I think that's kind of neat. And as for Patrick's characterization in this episode, I think it's one of the first times, if not the very first time, where there's a possibility that Patrick is smarter than we're led to believe, especially at the very end. Because, like, for most of this episode, he is just being naive and a bit dim in the head. However, as it goes on, Patrick goes to greater lengths to hide the secret box and to make it more mysterious to SpongeBob, to the point that once SpongeBob is finished with the box and sees what's inside its main compartment, he whips out a double whammy and just surprises the audience with the Christmas party photo that definitely ain't that embarrassed one that we saw in Christmas Who. Might be a different one. And as for this little conflict right here, which is well directed, and this little revelation that SpongeBob and Patrick have been best friends for their entire lives and will be best friends forever, 19, 20 years on, and that's still applicable. But the main oddity here is that it's difficult to tell how accurate this is. Like, most stuff in the early seasons for me is the prime canon, and a lot of the stuff onward is extended canon, and sometimes that can retcon the originals or add new twists or bring back characters and give them a different purpose. Stuff like that. Odd thing about this fact that SpongeBob and Patrick have been best friends forever is that it's been retconned twice. Once when they meet each other in Truth or Square in the flashback to when SpongeBob first moved into Conch Street, and again with the very controversial Camp Coral spin-off, especially in the third movie, they really laid it thick in there. But again, extended canon for both of those things. I think for the purposes of this episode, it is to show that their friendship is very important to them and is something that's been there for their whole lives. It's something that could be put at stake if SpongeBob does something bizarre and strange and against Patrick's wishes, which he does. And this is also one of the only times that Gary just flat out talks English to SpongeBob, and it's kind of a fun surprise. Because he technically spoke for the first time in Sleepy Time, but that was in a dream. And he also talks a lot in Chatterbox Gary, but that's with a special collar. It's just strange seeing these old SpongeBob episodes that aren't super old, but also aren't the new ones. And just seeing how there are things that have been done before, but also things that have been done since. That is a very fun thing to notice with long-running series, is the evolution of ideas and how they've been applied to different scenarios and styles over the course of the series. Like, at this point, they can just show Gary talking for a split second and it would not be a super controversial bit. I think that's pretty funny. Again, I just want to point out that this episode is very well directed, because you've got this frame of SpongeBob and Patrick being BFFs, and that's put on the line. First with the thing falling out, the pin. Don't know why you'd hang it by a pin. I don't know. I'm not a framing expert. But also, the sound effects in this portion of the episode are absolutely amazing. You've got elephant noises, you've got waterfall and splash sounds. Especially rare for SpongeBob is that at one point, or a few points, you hear the sound of firearms and guns being cocked, which is exceedingly rare in children's media this century because, of course, gun violence is a bigger issue these days. But it's just so strange to hear something you don't even really like to associate with Looney Tunes or silly symphonies that often being in full display in a SpongeBob episode. That's just kind of strange to me. But yeah, this is insanely well directed. The director is listed as Aaron Springer, but obviously he was the animation or timing or story director. There's also creative directors, sound editors, sequence editors. All these people go into making this cartoon very believable and making it something that can be enjoyed by as many people as possible, by making it as immersive as possible. And that is a very vital part of animation, making it immersive. And that scene of SpongeBob sneaking up does a dang good job of that. Then again, this episode and Band Geeks also have that era of, for a shaking sequence, panning the camera too far out and you can see the borders where those sequences originally ended. Like they didn't zoom them in properly or something. Don't know if that was a software thing or an intentional thing, but yeah. At least we have more people pointing that sort of thing out these days. That's a nice sentiment. Now, funny thing about this episode, like Big Pink Loser, I did have a book that told the story of this episode, but it was more of a retelling. Instead of a secret box, it was a Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy action figure set, and Patrick let SpongeBob borrow it for the day, and for some reason SpongeBob had to try and sneak in to get it back. I guess because he thought Patrick would ruin it, so it was kind of a prototype to the card, shockingly enough. But yeah, that was pretty fun, and I think they took this episode and made it an influence on that book, because there were, I mean, you can tell the same kind of stories over and over again, have different twists on it. This 22-year run is more than enough proof of that. And I just think both of these are really funny, and that they're stories that stand on their own, and that's actually kind of a nice feeling to have. And this big, shocking ending that reveals Patrick to be a manipulative schemer, again, it's pretty fun once in a while, especially because Patrick is kind of manipulative and being smart about it, instead of just implying that he thinks he's smart but still being completely stupid about it. Like, this was a breath of fresh air for Patrick, and it was also the first time we saw the inside of his house as more than just this very tiny apartment. He had a bedroom, he had a wall with a frame on it. It's no I'm with stupid in terms of developing the setting, but yeah, we're over halfway through this original 3-season run, and they're still adding stuff to SpongeBob that we take for granted now, so it was a good thing that it went on and developed itself. Especially because Band Geeks is by far the most acclaimed episode of the show. It was written by my good old power trio, C.H. Greenblatt, Aaron Springer, and Meriwether Williams. And this is just a classic. It's a masterpiece. I don't really want to go too in-depth with my feelings on it because they are mostly positive. I just want to talk about the legacy of this episode because I find it utterly fascinating. Basically, the reason this episode was made is that the writers wanted to give SpongeBob a rival, but they couldn't figure out a way to make SpongeBob believably angry and in a rivalry with someone. Bulbass was the closest they got, and occasionally Plankton, but yeah, they couldn't really do it properly, so they invented Squilliam, who was basically Squidward, but more full of himself and more rich and famous. He lived in a mansion, which is further explored in one of his future appearances. And yeah, he does have future appearances after this, once in Season 3 and a few times across 6 and 7, but he's mysteriously disappeared from the main narrative since Season 7, and I don't know why, because there's a lot of places that you can still take this guy. And he is one of the most popular anti-heroes on the show, kind of providing something for Squidward to fight against that you can totally root for him on. Because Squilliam is very condescending, and he is very sarcastic to Squidward, and very unwilling to share his popularity with his old high school buddy of sorts. And another reason this episode is so impactful on the grand scheme of SpongeBob is that it's another one where a lot of different characters are utilized, and they're all shown in their natural habitats here. Mrs. Puff at a bakery, Mr. Crab at the Krusty Krab, Larry taking a shower, Plankton being tiny, Sandy going for a walk. Little bits like that help to make them more believable characters and more willing to partake in this band club that Squidward has invented in a rundown factory. So, I think if you have a favorite character who isn't SpongeBob or Squidward, it would be a safe bet that this would be your favorite episode because it shows that character at some of their best. Because you get some world-famous quotes from Patrick, some that I've actually seen classmates put as their yearbook quote. I cannot believe it. I cannot believe that people still don't know that mayonnaise isn't an instrument, and neither is horseradish. And I think another great thing about this episode is that it's about music, and SpongeBob has had great musical numbers before, but this episode is something completely different. It's all about characters trying to perform music and not really doing that well with it, which I think is very relatable for young musicians and kids wanting to get into music. And it has stuck with people, and Sweet Victory has very much helped in developing some kids' taste in music and how epic music should be. It is a very influential episode, not just on SpongeBob, but on the lives of people who grew up watching this episode, and I think that's awesome. Again, it's not my personal favorite episode, but it is in the top 10. It is an all-time masterpiece. And I think an underlying reason for this acclaim is also that it's an underdog story with Squidward, because usually Squidward will win, but he will have to sacrifice something, like having to go up against the mean delivery. But there are a few episodes where Squidward is a complete winner, like he totally beats someone's butt and he totally owns the episode the whole way through. Like, obviously there is a dark period where all the instruments have been destroyed and all the band members have not put any effort into it, and he thanks them for nothing, but after that it is way more satisfying seeing him just rise up and conduct at the Bubble Bowl. And I think that's kind of beautiful. And that scene of SpongeBob performing this guy's song that I forgot to put in my notes, sorry, Sweet Victory, it's just a classic SpongeBob bit, and for some people even, it's their end to the show, and I'm like, really? Like, even if you're a pre-movie purist, you've still got 25 more episodes to go after this, so why end here, even if it is your favorite moment of the series? But I do kind of get it. It is definitely a watershed moment of the show, and yeah, it was very hard to top it, and some people would still say that they haven't, and fair enough if you have that opinion. And I'm also amazed that this episode's legacy has just kept growing, because when the Best Day Ever Marathon occurred in 2006, this episode was only ranked the 38th out of 100 candidates that got into the finals. But to be fair, most of the episodes in like the top 10 and 20 were recent season 3 and 4 episodes, so difficult to really gauge if it was popular with most fans or just SpongeBob viewers who were mostly kids who were watching those season 4 episodes for the first time. But the very next year, in 2007, during the Thanksgiving weekend, Sweet Victory was voted the greatest moment in Nicktoon history up to that point. Of all 20-something shows and all 16 years of Nicktoons, Sweet Victory was considered the all-time greatest. And then, in 2012, when the United Kingdom had a Top 100 SpongeBob countdown, Band Geeks in general, the episode, hit number 1, so as the years have gone on, this episode has received more and more acclaim, and although IMDb isn't my go-to for statistics on everything, the fact that this episode, alongside The Secret Box, has a 9.8, making it one of the most acclaimed pieces of media ever, really says something about how much people love this episode and its progression and its characters and its jokes and its ending. And I think Nickelodeon and the crew kind of get it, but don't completely get it, if you know what I mean. Because with Tom Kenny, when he put it in his top 20 in 2009, it was floating around the top 10, but it wasn't exactly one of his favorites. He liked the idea that Squidward was kind of on the receiving end of this corny 80s rock anthem, and it's clear from the way he says it, he doesn't like 80s music. So I guess even if you do want an episode where Squidward's down on his luck in the end, you could look at it and say, this music isn't to my tastes, haha. And then, very infamously, during the 2019 Super Bowl, the first after the passing of Steven Hillenburg, they got the rights to use SpongeBob characters and the opening notes to the Sweet Victory sequence, and to reference this episode, but they did a very quick flash animation of the characters, and then they skipped straight on during the halftime show, and they have remedied that. They did reference Sweet Victory fully in the Paramount Plus announcement recently, so yeah, even though the Super Bowl moment got a lot of hate from fans for being a bit tone deaf, I am very happy that Nick still understands that this is a very beloved moment in the show and is a good advertising tool at this point. I mean, it's kind of cynical to think about that when just moments from SpongeBob are becoming advertising tools for the show and for products, but it's giving the people what they want, and again, I like seeing this episode. It's one of my very favorites, and yeah, after all this talk, I do have to say I really do like Sweet Victory. I think it's a nice ending to this episode, and even though this isn't my personal favorite episode ever, it's not even my favorite of season 2, it is worth remembering, and it is worth studying at this point to see how stuff from our childhood can influence us in the future and just become parts of our culture. It is worth a study in that regard, and for that, I think it's probably one of the most important episodes in television history. So that's it for The Secret Box and Band Geeks. My question of the week for you last week was, what was your favourite Doodlebob quote? Both Jack McGinn and Rebel Friend replied Mia Hui Minyoe, which, yeah, simple but effective. My question of the week for you this week is, what is the most overrated scene in SpongeBob history? Because I could imagine fans being a bit tired of Sweet Victory. Like, I love it all the same, even if it's not my favorite thing ever. But I do have to wonder, is there a classic moment in SpongeBob that you've gotten tired of or just never saw the exact appeal of in the first place? Like, for me, it's a couple bits in Chocolate with Nuts that I just felt were a little annoying and not as clever as I wanted them to be, but it's totally me thing. And there's also Gary Come Home from Have You Seen the Snail, the song that I like, but it doesn't really make me cry. It doesn't really make me super sad, and I can't really blame the song for that. I'm just a bit older now and don't really get choked up by media all too often. But I'd like to hear yours. Things are looking crabby next week. That's right, next week, as I delve into the horrors of Graveyard Shift and the horrific overspending of Krusty Love. Goodbye for now.